One of the first things a digital photographer learns as they move their work onto the internet is to protect that work with some sort of a watermark. There is no doubt you need to copyright your work. However, I'm going to bet the folks who rip off someone else's photos for their own use without a second thought don't lose any sleep over issues of intellectual property rights. Watermarks are the perfect solution for those sticky fingers. Spend enough time looking at pictures online and you will see all sorts of variations, each designed to get the point across that someone already owns the rights to a watermarked picture. The in-your-face solution, while effective at warding off someone pilfering your work, is equally effective at sending visitors as potential art buyers running for the back button on their browsers as well. Lightroom provides a pretty sophisticated solution to watermarking images for online viewing via their web gallery or slideshow generating modules. While you're certainly able to place a watermark onto prints exported from Lightroom, I think that any digital overprinting effect, like a watermark or a faux signature, really cheapens that physical, handheld version of your work. A reasonable consideration for truly fine art limited edition prints might inspire the dedicated printmaker to affix a physical embossed mark along the edge of a finished print referred to as a printer's chop, but never ever a digitally produced mark or signature as a part of the image itself. We can access the watermark editor from within each module by dropping down from the Lightroom menu on a Mac, the Edit menu on a PC, and then clicking on the Edit Watermarks option. When the editor window opens, the image one is currently working with will be on stage. Let's have a look at its layout. To the right of the editor's content window, we find everything you need for designing a text watermark or affecting a graphic watermark designed in Photoshop. Let's work with text as our initial watermarking style here. In the Text Options panel, I drop down to Swiss 721 Extended. It is one of my preferred fonts for watermarking, and when I show you my stamping process done inside Photoshop, I intend to use the same font there as well. This way you can better assess which method may be the best process for your workflow. I normally utilize a drop shadow when stamping images inside Photoshop, so in order to compare apples to apples in this presentation, the settings you see now inside the watermark editor will approximate what you will see me do when I show you the alternative process I use in Photoshop. Also take note that as I move through only these 7 images, which will eventually become my web gallery or slideshow, that the settings I choose here in the watermark editor affect each image precisely the same. My watermark's overall size, opacity, vertical and horizontal inset, all these elements decided upon when building its design and placement coordinates initially, will affect each image identically. Watch as I quickly cycle through this series here inside the Lightroom watermark editor. What you see here is just not good enough for me. I want more control over how my artwork is presented to viewers who decide to spend a bit of their time thinking about the images I choose to represent myself as an artist in an online presentation, a slideshow, or a book I publish for viewing on a tablet. So I choose to add a bit of extra work to the end of an already lengthy process evolving images for my presentations. Let me show you this alternative method of watermarking your work too. You can accomplish what I'm about to show you with any version of Photoshop, even with Photoshop Elements. However, there is a layer opacity effect I use in the CS version of Photoshop that is not available in Photoshop Elements. That effect is Fill Control, and you will better understand its importance here as we move along with my presentation. First, you need to open a new document, so drop down from the File menu to New. You can also use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control-N. Select the Web option from the preset pop-up in the New Document window Photoshop provides, and the smallest default size, 640 by 480, will be chosen for you, as well as the appropriate web file resolution, 72 pixels per inch. Press OK and you're ready to go. When your new document opens, make sure that the default foreground-background color setup is in place. If you do not see the front chip rendered as black and the chip behind representing the background color as white, then either click on the tiny black over white chip icon or simply hit the D key and Photoshop will reset to its default foreground, background, black over white combination for you. Now comes the fun part, considering what font will work best as your watermark, stamp, ID brush we're going to build. As I mentioned in another screencast, I often utilize a font managing utility provided by the Mac operating system Fontbook. This is to help me pre-visualize which font might work best for whatever I need to be using type for at the time. I have found that fonts with a more bold-faced design work best here because I intend to dramatically reduce the opacity of the copyright message overlaying my photographs. As well, I tend to steer clear of what is referred to as sans serif or Roman fonts, letters with those little end-stroke flourishes like Garamond and Times possess, for example. Just as a suggestion, besides Swiss 721 Extended, the font I used earlier for composing my watermark in Lightroom, I also like Futura, Blair MDITC, and one of the few serif fonts I like for this purpose, Baramond. But it is important for you to experiment for yourself and find a font you like best. Just make sure it's not overly decorative or grungy in its design. Your watermark will become unreadable and therefore a useless distraction to your audience. With the Type tool selected and the Center Text option active, click inside the new document and begin typing. The first element of your watermark will be the copyright symbol. To make the copyright symbol on a Mac, simply type Option G. On a PC, type Control-Alt-C or instead type Alt-0169. After the copyright symbol, continue with either your name or you might consider your website address. Now, why would you want to substitute your name with your website address instead? After all, isn't it better to have people recognize whose photograph it is that they're viewing? Well, this is kind of a rabbit hole of a question, and best answered in a follow-up screencast I will title Creator Name versus URL as Watermark. One of the great things about working in Photoshop is that each time you click inside the document with the Type tool, Photoshop automatically sets up a new layer for that type to reside on. This way you can experiment with several different fonts, turning off the visibility of each variation as you complete it, then later have the opportunity to compare one to another so you can decide which one or two you want to turn into a custom brush. Make sure that you fill the document window left to right with your new watermark. If the text watermark appears too small inside your 640 pixel wide document, then open the character panel, accessing it from the window menu, and now do this. Hover your cursor over the type size icon at the upper left of the character panel. Note that your cursor transforms from the standard arrow into a hand with arrows extending left and right from the pointing index finger. Depress your mouse and move right to increase the type size, left to decrease the type size. Your type will not change until after you release your mouse. Using the scrubby sliders here is a simple and convenient way for you to change the size of your type after you have added it as an element to your project. Quick tip alert. You may recall from a previous screencast my having mentioned kerning, the process of adding to or deleting space between letters when using type. In that I'm talking about both scrubby sliders and the character panel here, I thought this would be the perfect time for me to address the issue of kerning. After all, the main idea in creating a self-identifying watermark for placement over your online work is that the ID stamp is easily readable. So depending upon what font you choose to utilize for this, it is entirely possible you will need to employ a bit of kerning between letters to make it more legible. Here's a great shortcut to a chore that can be a royal pain in the backside. If you are at all familiar with the kerning character adjustment and have worked with it before in the past, you may be used to selecting from the pop-up equations accessible from this panel. However, an easier method than always clicking to access these preset spacing options is to utilize the scrubby sliders along with the forward and backward arrows on your keyboard to move through the series of text you want to easily affect. Watch how this process allows for me precise, individual adjustments affecting all the letters on a layer at once in real time, permitting us to bypass those presets altogether, saving time and frustration. When you get to the end of a line, simply press Command Return on a Mac or Control Return on a PC to commit your changes to the text you've been working on, and you're done. Your watermark should now look something like this, or this, or this. Here we are utilizing the same font I used in Lightroom with its watermark editor. I'm going to turn it into a Photoshop brush I can use to stamp my images. Then I'm going to create an action that allows me to automate the process in the future. Now I realize this sounds like an awful lot of work to engage in when in Lightroom, all I have to do is design a watermark and let the program do all the rest for me, as it builds a complete web gallery there. But be patient with my explanation here, and I think you will see why this has become my favorite method for prepping work I will upload to the net. Press the C key to activate the crop tool or choose it from the tool panel. Drag from one corner diagonally to the opposite side, then use the handles along each edge of the active bounding box to pull in tightly on the text watermark. Hit return on your keyboard to commit to the crop. Press Command A on a Mac or Control A on a PC to select all, or just drop down from the Select menu to the All option there. You should see the marching ants surrounding what remains of the original 640 by 480 pixel document. Now drop down from the Edit menu to Define Brush Preset. A window will pop open. Type in a sensible name here. That way, whether you view available brushes by utilizing a list or by thumbnail, you will more easily find precisely what you are looking for when you return in the future. I'll return in the second part of this screencast to show you how we can automate the process of watermarking our images here in Photoshop as a more sophisticated option to Lightroom's watermark feature.